The hidden power of people who enjoy their own company. What if the most powerful person in the room is the one sitting alone, quietly sipping tea, not out of loneliness but by choice? What if we've misunderstood solitude this entire time, equating it with emptiness, when in fact it may be the birthplace of the most profound strength a human can develop? In a world obsessed with stimulation, attention, and noise, there exists a forgotten archetype. The person who thrives in silence, who draws energy from stillness, and who finds meaning not by escaping themselves, but by diving deeper into their own presence. This video is about that person. Maybe it's you. Maybe it could be... We're so used to measuring worth by visibility, how often someone posts, how many followers they have, how loud their voice echoes through digital corridors. But there's a hidden dimension of power that doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't even need to be seen. And that power belongs to people who enjoy their own company. Not because they're antisocial, not because they've given up on the world, but because they've discovered something most people never will. That the most intimate, most enduring relationship you will ever have is with yourself.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Let's be honest, most of us are afraid to be alone. We fill our calendars, our feeds, our homes, our minds with noise because silence confronts us with what we are. Alone, there's no one to impress, no role to play, no backdrop of distraction, just you. And that's where it gets terrifying. Because what if you don't like what you find? What if you've built your entire identity around being seen, being needed, being admired, and suddenly there's no one there to reflect that back to you? That's why solitude is feared. Not because it's empty, but because it's honest. But here's the twist. The people who embrace that fear, who walk into the cave of solitude willingly, often come out with something the rest of the world is missing: clarity. They see themselves without filters. They hear their own voice without it being drowned out by the opinions of others. They learn to sit with their thoughts, their doubts, their wounds, and instead of running from them, they listen. They ask deeper questions. And in that process, something incredible begins to happen. They stop needing the world to complete them. They stop seeking applause for every step they take. They become whole. What does it mean to be whole? It means you are not constantly leaking yourself into others. It means you are not performing for love, or hustling for worth, or begging to be chosen. You've already chosen yourself. You've already met yourself in the quiet and decided that version of you is enough. That's not ego. That's alignment. And that alignment becomes power, the quiet kind that doesn't announce itself but shifts the energy in a room. The kind that doesn't push but pulls. The kind that makes people wonder, what does this person know that I don't? People who enjoy their own company develop an inner gravity. They're not needy, which makes them magnetic. They're not reactive, which makes them trustworthy. They don't chase trends, which makes them timeless. And here's the part that most people miss: solitude, when chosen consciously, isn't isolation, it's integration. You begin to gather the scattered pieces of your identity. You begin to rewrite the narrative, not based on what the world told you to be, but based on what you truly are. And from that place, you become dangerous in the best way, because you're no longer easily manipulated. You're no longer addicted to being liked. You're no longer afraid of standing alone. Let me ask you something that might sting. When was the last time you were fully alone, without reaching for your phone, without music, without distraction, and felt peace, not panic? If that feels impossible, it's not because you're broken. It's because you've been conditioned to look outward for meaning. But what if the most important answers aren't out there? What if they're waiting in the silence you've been avoiding? The people who enjoy their own company have learned to make peace with their inner world. That doesn't mean they have no darkness. It means they've stopped pretending it's not there. They've sat with their own shadow and said, I see you. I won't run anymore. And that courage to face yourself without flinching is rarer than genius. It's rarer than charisma. It's the kind of strength that can't be taken away because it wasn't given by anyone else. So much of modern life is built to keep us externally focused. Algorithms promise connection but often leave us lonelier. We scroll endlessly, not because we're curious, but because we're afraid to be still. We enter relationships hoping someone will fix what we haven't faced. We chase success hoping it will fill a void that only self-acceptance can reach. But what if we flip the whole model? What if the foundation of everything, love, confidence, clarity, was built not on more input, but on deeper introspection? Imagine for a moment that you were stranded on an island, not forever, but for a while. No phone, no people, just you. Would that thought terrify you or excite you? Your answer says more than you think, because the way you relate to solitude is the way you relate to yourself, and the way you relate to yourself determines everything else in your life. This isn't about becoming a monk or rejecting the world. It's about reclaiming your inner space. It's about realizing that solitude is not the absence of connection, it's the presence of depth. And once you experience that, even briefly, you begin to move differently. You stop chasing. You start choosing. You stop broadcasting. You start listening. And in that listening, you hear the most powerful voice of all your own. The inner fortress, why people who master solitude become unshakable in a noisy world. There's something quietly heroic about a person who doesn't flinch when left alone with their own thoughts. In a world that constantly demands our attention, where every second is filled with pings, notifications, breaking news, and curated lives projected through glowing screens, the ability to sit in stillness without reaching for distraction is nothing short of revolutionary. Solitude, for most, feels like a void. But for those who have mastered it, it becomes a fortress, a place of clarity, protection, and power. And those who live from that fortress become unshakable. Let's talk about resilience, not the kind that gets highlighted in motivational posters, but the quiet kind that doesn't need to shout. The resilience of someone who doesn't crumble when left out, who doesn't panic when plans fall through, who doesn't spiral when others misunderstand them. That kind of strength doesn't come from external validation. It comes from solitude. From having spent enough time alone that your sense of self no longer depends on the approval of others. When you enjoy your own company, you're not immune to rejection, but you're no longer defined by it. Most people react to life. They're pulled in every direction by opinions, trends, fears, and expectations. But people who've built that inner fortress through solitude, they respond. They pause, they reflect, they choose. And that pause is everything. That pause is the space between stimulus and reaction. It's the space where wisdom lives. And if you've ever met someone who seems calm under pressure, who thinks before they speak, who remains grounded even when everything around them is chaos, you've encountered someone who spent time with themselves. Deep time. Alone, honest, and unfiltered. You might wonder, how does being alone teach me to be strong? It's simple, but profound. Because in solitude, you're confronted with your own patterns. You begin to notice the thoughts that loop endlessly, the fears that resurface, the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you deserve. And without the distraction of other people's narratives, you finally have the chance to rewrite your own. Solitude becomes a mirror, not one that flatters, but one that tells the truth. And if you can face that truth without running, you become someone the world cannot easily shake. This kind of person doesn't need to control everything because they trust themselves to handle anything. They don't fear silence because they've made peace with it. They don't need to fill every conversation because they're not afraid of space. And that makes them incredibly powerful in relationships, in leadership, in creativity, because they're not operating from a place of lack. They're not trying to be chosen. They've already chosen themselves. And here's something most people never realize. The noise of the world loses its grip on you when you've reclaimed your inner stillness. You stop being addicted to drama because you no longer need external chaos to distract you from internal discomfort. You stop being easily offended because your ego isn't so fragile. You stop chasing because you've realized you already have the most important thing, your own attention. Let me ask you something quietly radical. If every voice around you was silenced for a month, would your inner voice be a friend or a tyrant? That question isn't just philosophical, it's diagnostic. It tells you exactly where your work is. If your inner voice is harsh, it means you've been outsourcing your worth. If it's kind, it means you've done the work of healing. And the only way to do that work is through solitude. Not isolation, not loneliness, but intentional, conscious time spent in your own presence. I'm not saying you should withdraw from the world. I'm saying you should become so rooted in yourself that when you return to the world, you're no longer seeking to be filled, you're overflowing. You're no longer asking, do they like me? You're asking, do I like me? And that shift is the foundation of freedom. Because here's the secret: people who enjoy their own company don't need to prove anything. And in a world obsessed with performance, that's an act of rebellion. They are not dependent on trends to know what matters. They don't need a crowd to feel alive. They don't need constant feedback to know they're on the right path. They've built something more permanent, a relationship with themselves that's based on truth, not applause. And from that place, they can give more freely, love more honestly, and lead more wisely because they're not leaking energy trying to be someone they're not. They show up as they are, and that authenticity is more magnetic than any performance could ever be. The magnetic stillness, how solitude unlocks confidence, creativity, and irresistible presence. There's a paradox at the heart of human interaction that most people don't understand. The more comfortable you are being alone, the more others are drawn to you. Not because you're trying to impress them, not because you're performing a role, but because there's something inexplicably magnetic about someone who doesn't need the room but still commands it. That magnetism doesn't come from charisma in the conventional sense. It comes from stillness, from depth, from the quiet confidence of someone who has explored themselves so deeply they no longer need to prove anything to anyone. And the path to that kind of presence almost always begins in solitude. When you spend time alone, not distracted, not numbing, but actually alone, you begin to hear something most people never hear in their entire lives. Your own voice, unedited. That voice isn't just a stream of thoughts. It's a reservoir of intuition and insight. It's where your creativity is born. It's where real confidence is forged. Because real confidence isn't loud. It's not about dominating a room or having the perfect comeback. It's the quiet knowing that you're enough, that you can trust yourself, that even if everything falls apart, you'll still be standing because you've stood alone before. Most people don't reach this place because they're afraid of the silence, afraid of what they'll find if they stop running. But the irony is, what they're running from is the very thing that holds the key to their power. When you remove the noise, when you step away from the constant feedback loop of social media, opinions, and expectations, something miraculous happens. You begin to create instead of react. You begin to engage with your own thoughts not as a passive observer, but as an active participant. And that's where creativity lives, not in the chaos of the world, but in the quiet womb of solitude. Think about every great artist, writer, philosopher, or inventor. They all had one thing in common. They knew how to be alone. Not just physically, but mentally. They carved out space to hear something deeper than the surface chatter of daily life. And from that space, they created things that moved the world. That's not a coincidence. That's the result of mental clarity. And clarity is born in solitude. But creativity isn't the only gift that emerges there. Presence is another. When you enjoy your own company, you stop performing. You stop trying to control how you're perceived. And paradoxically, that lack of effort makes you infinitely more attractive. Why? Because people are starving for authenticity. We're surrounded by filters, scripts, and curated personas. But when someone walks into a room and they're not trying to be anything other than themselves, it's like a breath of fresh air. You feel it instantly. You want to be around it. You want to understand it. That kind of presence doesn't come from studying social cues or reading self-help books on confidence. It comes from knowing yourself so well that you don't need to be anyone else. It comes from solitude, from the hours spent alone asking difficult questions, from the nights when you sat with your pain instead of distracting yourself, from the mornings when you chose stillness over scrolling. Every one of those moments becomes a brick in the foundation of your inner presence. And over time, that presence becomes unshakable. Let me ask you something that might stop you in your tracks. If you couldn't speak, couldn't show your resume, couldn't reveal anything about your achievements, would your energy still speak for you? Would your presence still carry weight? That's not a rhetorical question. It's an invitation to consider the deeper currency you carry in this world, the energy that can't be faked or forced, the kind that either draws people in or pushes them away. And the only way to cultivate that energy is to meet yourself fully, in silence. People who enjoy their own company don't need to dominate to be noticed. They don't need to talk over others to be heard. They emanate something subtler, but stronger, a groundedness that makes others feel safe, seen, and drawn in. And that's the kind of impact that lasts, because it's not based on momentary charm, it's based on deep alignment. So many of us chase confidence like it's something we can acquire from the outside. But the truth is, it's an internal equilibrium, a state of being that arises when your inner and outer lives are in harmony. And the only way to find that harmony is to spend time in solitude, listening, reflecting, being. Not because you're hiding from the world, but because you're preparing to meet it with the full force of your undiluted self. And when you do, everything changes, not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because you become more real, more present, more powerful. The kind of person people remember, not because you shouted the loudest, but because in your silence they heard themselves more clearly. The final awakening, how solitude teaches us to love without need, live without fear, and die without regret. There's a moment, if you spend enough time alone in full awareness, when something inside you finally clicks. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's not fireworks or revelation. It's a quiet knowing, like the sound of a lock turning after years of resistance. And in that moment you realize you are enough. Not because you've accomplished everything, not because you've mastered life, but because you've stripped away the illusions, the masks, the noise. You faced yourself without flinching. You've walked through the valley of your own mind and emerged not with answers but with peace. That is the final awakening, and it changes everything. People who enjoy their own company reach that place not by escaping the world, but by confronting it from the inside out. They stop needing people to complete them, which allows them to love more freely. They stop fearing loss, which allows them to live more fully. They stop avoiding mortality, which allows them to die with their eyes open. Solitude, when embraced not endured, becomes the training ground for a life of depth. It rewires your relationship to everything: love, fear, freedom, and even death. Let's talk about love first. Most love in this world is transactional. It hides behind words like loyalty and commitment, but underneath it's often a barter system. I'll give you approval if you give me validation. I'll give you affection if you give me safety. But people who enjoy their own company don't enter love from a place of need. They enter it from a place of fullness. They're not looking for someone to fill the silence. They've made peace with the silence. So when they choose you, it's not because they need you, it's because they see you. And there's nothing more powerful than being chosen by someone who doesn't need to choose anyone at all. That kind of love is rare. And it's only possible when you've done the inner work that solitude demands. When you've looked your loneliness in the eye and said, "I'm not afraid of you anymore." Only then can you love someone without trying to own them. Only then can you give without keeping score. Only then can you say, "I want you in my life, but I don't need you to be whole." That's not detachment. That's maturity. That's freedom. Now let's talk about fear specifically, the fear of living wrong. We're all haunted by the question, am I wasting my life? It's why we chase career titles, romantic milestones, social approval. But solitude teaches us something radical. The only wasted life is the one lived out of alignment. And the only way to find alignment is to stop running from discomfort, from reflection, from silence. When you spend time alone, you begin to listen to the quiet truths under the noise. You start to realize what actually matters to you, not what you were told to want, but what your soul whispers when no one else is around. And finally, there's death. Most people live in denial of it. We distract ourselves, delay the thought, pretend it's far away. But people who've embraced solitude tend to have a different relationship with mortality. Because when you stop fearing the quiet, you stop fearing the end. You've already faced so many little deaths of ego, of illusion, of false identity, that the final one doesn't feel like an enemy. It feels like a return, a release, a homecoming. And people who live that way don't die with regret, because they didn't wait for permission to be themselves. They live from the center. They weren't perfect, but they were real. So let me ask you the final, most important question of all. If today were your last day, would you be proud of the relationship you've built with yourself? Not your job, not your achievements, not your followers, just you. Because when everything else falls away, that's what remains. And if you've made peace there, you've already won. The hidden power of people who enjoy their own company isn't just that they are self-sufficient. It's that they are awake. They love without chains. They live without masks. They die without fear. In a world desperate for connection, they remind us that the deepest connection begins within. And maybe that's the final twist. The more we learn to be with ourselves, the more beautifully we can be with others. And that, my friend, is not loneliness, it's liberation.